Então, Simon Phipps, ele é, como eu falei, presidente da OZ, da Open Source Initiative. Ele foi, durante muito tempo, o diretor, o Open Source, how do you say, Chief Open Source Officer, que era uma espécie de vice-presidente de Open Source da Sun Microsystems. O Simon foi um dos responsáveis pela liberação da máquina virtual Java como software livre, né, alguns anos atrás, e ele hoje é CEO do MariaDB, que é o fork do MySQL, tá certo? É a organização hoje em dia que dá continuidade ao MySQL, certo? Então, com vocês, Mr. Simon Phipps.
Good afternoon. So I am your English lesson for the day. I'm going to want to talk to you about pragmatic software freedom. What I mean by that is I want to talk about the reasons why you as a developer should be interested in free and open source software. So that's our topic for the next hour or so. After this session, I'll be then presenting another talk in the open source room, and we'll be talking about software patents and why Brazilians should care about them and what Brazilian developers should do to protect themselves. So those are the two talks that I'm doing. So the first talk, I want to talk about software freedom. So as Bruno said, I am the president at the moment of the Open Source Initiative. OSI is the organization that defines what an open source license actually is. So we are the last authority for defining what an open source license actually is. And we protect that idea of open source from abuse. We normally do it very quietly. We send private letters to companies that are doing bad things, and we try to help them to do the right things. We've been doing that for nearly 15 years. We started in 1998. And in that time, open source software has been a phenomenon that you find everywhere. Absolutely everywhere. You may not realize how everywhere open source software is. Maybe you are an iPhone user or a Mac user. Well, did you know on your iPhone, whenever you install a new app on your iPhone, the iTunes store that is serving the app to you is running on Linux? Whenever you access most web pages that are served up using PhoneGap, it is probably coming from an HTTP server that is provided by the Apache Software Foundation. Although you may not see free and open source software everywhere on your desktop, everything that makes your desktop possible is open source. So open source software is absolutely everywhere. Now, why is that? To find out why, we have to go back in history and meet two important gentlemen. So the gentleman here on your left is Bill Joy. Bill Joy was the creator of Berkeley Unix, or BSD Unix. And he was working on that in the 1980s. And as part of his work, he created a software license, a copyright license, that meant that anyone could join in with what he was doing. Only Bill didn't really want you to join in too much. He wanted to get on with inventing BSD Unix. He went on to be one of the founders of Sun Microsystems, and he's still working in the technology industry today. He is a venture capitalist working for a US venture capital company. His principle was that he has written BSD Unix. He says, I have written this software. I want you to use this software for anything you want. Go ahead and do whatever you like with it. Make money with it, make new technologies with it. Just don't blame me if it goes wrong. That's the driving principle behind BSD Unix. And the philosophy of that BSD school of free and open source software is the principle of being allowed to do anything you want, just not interfering with what other people are doing. Now, about the same time that Bill Joy was doing this, another gentleman, Bill was working in California and Colorado in the US. On the east coast of the US, at MIT, there was a gentleman called Richard Stallman. And this is Richard actually giving testimony in the European Parliament about software patents. And Richard had a different story. He had worked on software, and he felt that every developer had a right to have access to the source code to all of the software that they depended on. And after 2 significant incidents, which you'll have to read about somewhere else, he decided that he had to protect developers' and users' right to have access to the source code of the software. And so he started something called the Free Software Foundation, and he wrote a copyright license called the GNU General Public License. By the way, that name, General Public License, means the license for the general public. It means it's the license for every man. So that is what the name means. It doesn't mean it is a general license. It means it is the license for everyone. Because the intent behind the GPL was to protect everyone's use of software, their software freedom. Richard defined some concepts that he called the free software definition. And this is a simplified version of the free software definition. The free software definition says that as a user or a developer, you should always have the unlimited right to use the software for whatever you wish, to study the software so you understand how it works, to improve the software so that it meets your needs or the needs of others better, and you should be free to share that software either in the original or in your improved form with whoever you wish. These 4 principles lie at the heart of a system of ethics. And Richard's view of free and open source software, well, he only uses the term free software. Richard's view of free software is that it is a profoundly ethical subject. And I agree with him that it is a strongly ethical subject. Now, this movement remained mostly academic in universities during the 1980s and most of the 1990s. And then at the end of the 1990s, something important was happening. The internet had produced the World Wide Web in around about 1992. And by 1998, we were all using a web browser called Netscape Navigator. The company that made Netscape Navigator, Netscape Communications, was severely damaged by very bad behavior by a large American company. And they were forced to stop investing in Netscape Navigator. They decided it had to carry on somewhere and somehow, and so they decided to ask for help from people who already knew about making software community-based. So they asked for advice, and they were given a lot of ethical advice. Advice about ethics. They had people telling them that they must make the software be free software because it would be evil not to do so. Now, if you have a conversation like that with a business executive, you can expect it to be a very short conversation because most business executives are not interested in good and evil. They're interested in success and failure. And they don't want to be told lectures about ethics. They instead want to be told practical matters about how to achieve their objectives. And so a different group of people gave advice to Netscape Communications, and Netscape Communications started the Mozilla Foundation. And Netscape Navigator became the Mozilla web browser. That experience of helping Netscape influenced some people who later went on to form OSI. into realizing that you can't lecture corporations on ethics. Corporations aren't people. Corporations are spreadsheets. Corporations are systems. And so to influence a company, you have to give it benefits. You have to give it, assist it in being profitable and successful. You have to help it avoid threats and risks. You can't lecture a company. You have to help a company. And so, as Brian Cantrell once said, Brian is one of the inventors of the ZFS file system, he explained that a corporation doesn't love you or hate you. A corporation is like a lawnmower. You put your hand into a lawnmower and it cuts your hand off. It's not that it hates you, it's a lawnmower. That's what it does. It cuts things. And if you stand in front of a lawnmower and tell it why it is wrong to cut the grass, it will just run over you. But if you stand behind a lawnmower and push and steer it, you can make it go in the direction that you know that it should. So the principle of open source is a principle of software freedom. But we achieve our goal not by giving a lecture about ethics, but by taking our belief in that system of ethics and helping companies succeed in their business goals. So in the end, open source is the same thing as free software. My Brazilian friends ask me, should we translate open source as código aberto? And I say, no, you should not do that, because that is not what it means. Open source means software libre. It means software libre for an English-speaking audience that doesn't understand that free isn't about money. But they're the same thing. They're just seen from different directions and through different lenses. So the open source initiative defined a set of pragmatic rules about copyright licenses. These pragmatic rules about copyright licenses help you to know whether a copyright license protects the four freedoms. And we're able to tell a company not some vague ethics that they can't understand because they are a spreadsheet or a lawnmower. Instead, we tell them some concrete facts that have to be true about the license. And the reason why in the last 15 years, free software has gone from being an academic interest to driving every business on the planet is because we were able to put the idea of software freedom in terms that companies could understand. And we were able to talk about benefits that people who didn't necessarily share our ethics were able to implement. You see, to change a company, you just need one man or one woman who is ethical. It just needs you. And you are able to take your ethic and your belief in software freedom and help to steer the company in a direction that makes software freedom happen more. And you're able to do that because you are able to embrace the practical benefits of open source for your company. Now, what are those benefits? Well, the number one benefit of open source software is that it is permissionless. That is to say, you can use it without asking anyone's permission first. You can study it without asking for permission. You can change it without asking for permission. You can give it to someone else without asking for permission. And that permissionless environment opens up your ability to innovate. It means you are able to use any open source software technology as a key element of your business. So you need a user interface framework. Well, why write your own? Why go to a company that will ask you for money in exchange for permission to use it? Why not use a user interface framework that has already been written and which you can change to make it fit your project? That is the permissionless heart of open source software. And then the second element that is really important about open source software is it gives you flexibility. You see, when you go to a proprietary software company, you give away your flexibility. You give away the opportunity to change to a different framework or a different tool next year because you have spent money and invested in licenses, and the company that is producing those tools will carry on doing what they were doing this year. And if next year your needs have changed, they won't change with you. But with open source software, you are always free to change it, or more importantly, to go to a place where people are changing it to meet your needs. And then flexibility is about when you pay. You see, open source software is not about saving money. Instead, open source software is about having the freedom to save money. It is about deciding whether you are going to invest in skills and hire programmers, or whether you are going to invest in consultants, or whether you're going to invest in ready-made projects from suppliers. But all the time, you remain in control. You decide whether to spend money, how much money to spend, who to spend the money with. You will have to spend money because nothing in this world is actually free as in a gratuit. But you will be able to decide who you spend money with, when, how much, and for how long. That flexibility lies at the heart of open source software. So if you wanted a phrase that summed up open source software to communicate to somebody, you could tell them that it is about permissionless flexibility. It is about being able to use software without asking first and remaining in control of your business after you have done so. And to use proprietary software is to always have to seek permission to make changes to your installation and deployment, and to always have to do the thing that your supplier tells you that they can do, rather than the thing you know you want to do instead. Open source changes the rules. We're in a new society now, and the rules have changed, and, well, the old attempt to impose old rules no longer applies. Open source means that you can get the flexibility to respond to the market. It means you can come to market with new products faster than a proprietary company that has to negotiate licenses, that has to negotiate price, that has to negotiate usage terms, that has to negotiate the terms in a different country when you sell in Argentina or Uruguay. You don't have to go back and renegotiate the license to distribute because you don't need permission. Think about this in the context of cloud computing. I believe cloud computing is impossible without open source software. Now, why do I believe that? Well, it's because at its heart, cloud computing in together to collaborate, to create the thing that they need. Those people will always remove obstacles that are put in their way. If you are a company that wants to work with open source, you have to remember that the community will always work around no entry signs and take away obstacles. Instead of trying to control open source communities, what matters is that you're able to influence communities. And this is the most difficult part of open source for most businesses. A business believes it has to control all of the things that make it successful. But open source treats control as an obstacle. It treats any attempt to retain control as an obstacle. And so if you're going to do open source as a business, if you're going to try and create an open source community, you have to make sure that you only seek to influence through your contribution, not by the things that you try to impose on the community. You should contribute. Contribute is the key word for open source community. Open source communities say, as Linus Torvalds did, show me the code. That's all I care about. I'm not interested in your company's business. I don't want to buy anything from you. Show me the code. If you show me the code, if you help me succeed as I collaborate with you over the code, I will respect you and I will let you steer the direction. But if you don't contribute, well, you'll pay forever because people will fork. People will go and collaborate some other place and you'll have nobody helping you. Bill Joy, whose photograph you saw at the beginning, once said, you cannot hire all of the smart people. Some of them will always work for your competitors. But open source lets you work with all of the smart people in a given domain because they come together voluntarily to collaborate over the software. The other thing that you should do in a community is you should protect that community. And in particular, the biggest threat to open source software and to software freedom is the ability to interfere in other things that software patents allow. Software patents allow companies to reach into places where they have no presence and seize control, make threats, demand money. Now, in Brazil, you do not officially have software patents at the moment, but I'm convinced that you will have a growing problem from software patents as developers here in Brazil. Completely convinced. And Deb and I are going to explain why that is after the coffee break in the session about software patents. But I'd suggest to you that in thinking about what open source communities are, they are groups of people who come together and they are empowered by those 4 freedoms to collaborate. And you need to contribute and participate, and you need to make sure you're protecting yourself and that community from outside forces. There are also companies that want to make you believe that they support these software freedoms, this open source. They use all the right words. They adopt the correct posture. But you just instinctively know that there's something wrong. It's like in this picture. There's the Statue of Liberty there. She's in that famous pose of liberty. And then you see in the background the dock cranes of New Jersey, all in the same posture, all hoping you will believe that commerce is the same as liberty. So be wary of open source claims. Always ask to see the code. Always ask if the community has all of the 4 freedoms for themselves, or whether the company that is sponsoring things has got a little bit more freedom than everybody else. And avoid those places. Avoid the places where somebody has decided they are special and above the community, that they deserve more than you do. Because those aren't really open source communities. Those are companies that are like the dock cranes of New Jersey, adopting the posture of liberty without adopting the reality. OSI exists to protect this idea of pragmatic software freedom. We're an international organization. We're based in California in the US, but as you might be able to tell from my accent, I'm not from California, I'm from England, and we have members all over the world. You have a Brazilian board member, Bruno Souza is one of the directors of the Open Source Initiative. And by joining OSI, you can help us protect software freedom, the pragmatic software freedom. We all have the ethic, but your company needs the pragmatic benefits in order to embrace software freedom and make it available for everybody else. So that's everything I wanted to say to you. To recap, software freedom and open source are the same thing seen through different lenses. Software freedom is an ethical construct that we all share in the open source movement. The open source perspective is about being able to steer companies to make software freedom more widely available. Software freedom is a practical matter of business value, a practical matter of maintaining business control, a practical matter of retaining the flexibility to innovate without permission from somebody else first. And open source communities are places where people and companies that are benefiting from those freedoms come together voluntarily to make software happen. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I very much appreciate it. Thank you.